you're listening to the wrong podcast. Topics today include making money, making whoopee, and making movies.
Wrong! What's wrong with you? What's wrong with y'all?
What's wrong with you?
What's wrong with you people? Wrong! You do have to tolerate it. It's my show.
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm here to talk about politics, culture, religion, sports, and anything else you're not allowed to talk about in polite company. Issue number 1! Canned! I'm a huge Seinfeld fan. I've probably told you that. Really love the show Seinfeld. There was this classic episode where Kramer and Newman were devising a plan to make money off of recycled cans, because if you could buy them in New York and transport them to Michigan, you could make double the money. And the thing that got in the way of their plan was the transportation, until Newman realized that they could use a U.S. post office truck to transport the cans, which would cause lots of legal problems for them if they went through with this, I'm sure. And I bring this up because this week I read this news article about this family in California that got busted doing this very thing. And they have made almost $7.5 million getting cans from Arizona and bringing them to California. And when they got busted, the police found $1 million worth of aluminum cans in a storage container waiting, to cash them in. This boggles my mind. Like, somebody actually made this happen. They figured out a way to do it, and they were making tons of money from doing this. And the problem with doing this, the reason I use the word busted, is because it's against the law. It's actually fraud. It's fraud because when you pay your California redemption value for the cans, you are paying that money to California. And then when you get that money back, California is giving you the money back that you paid to the state. So if you paid for it in Arizona and then asked California for that money, well, that's fraud. You didn't actually give any money to California. So keep this in mind next time you're crossing state lines. Maybe don't turn in that can that you bought at the gas station on the other side of Quartzsite. And the thing about all of this is they aren't the only ones doing this. Like 93 people over the last year have been arrested for doing this very kind of thing. And it's a new world to me. Didn't know. And I guess I can't follow up on it. Issue number 2, prayer. Last week, there was an incident at a South Carolina Republican prayer breakfast. This was hosted by Senator Tim Scott, who is running for president. He had, people who are Christians and Republicans come together for a morning prayer breakfast where they would pray together. And he invited Congresswoman Nancy Mace to come speak at this prayer breakfast. And Nancy Mace, in her speech, did the strangest thing I think I have ever heard at a prayer breakfast. She told this personal quip about how when she woke up that morning for the prayer breakfast, her fiance was in bed with her and he wanted to get busy. And she said, no, we can't. We've got to go to the prayer breakfast this morning. We don't have time. And when she told this story, there were nervous chuckles. And she said, but don't worry, I'll see him later tonight. And if you're not aware, I'm sure you all are. I'm sure you all see the problem in this story. But just in case you're like Nancy Mace and weren't aware, Christians reserve sex for married couples. And if someone is your fiance, they are not your spouse. It is not time yet for that. And there's so many things about this story I need to talk about. And first and foremost, it's not that she was having premarital sex with her fiance. I'm aware this happens. I'm aware it happens with Christian couples. This isn't new to me. I'm not surprised in the least. She shouldn't be doing this if she claims to be a Christian, but she would be the first and she won't be the last, for sure. The thing that really boggles my mind about this, really boggles my mind about this, is one, why did she think this was an appropriate story to tell at a prayer breakfast? Even if she was married to the man, how is this story appropriate for a prayer breakfast or for any official thing that she's doing as a congresswoman? Like, this topic is just kind of off the topic, off the shelf, off limits. This topic is off limits. You don't talk about this kind of thing in public meetings, right? Like, even if it's okay, and it is, if you're married, God bless you, go for it. But you don't need to be sharing that information with everybody, and certainly not at a religious prayer breakfast, right? And then the other thing that boggles my mind is that she didn't even know that this might be an issue for somebody confessing to be a Christian. It didn't even occur to her. It was outside of her field of vision that this might be an issue for somebody confessing to be a Christian. She didn't know. And this, so clearly states what's wrong with mixing Christianity with politics in the way it's been done over the last several years. This woman is a stalwart conservative Republican. And for many people, including her, that means she's a Christian. And what hasn't come into her field, what hasn't come into her life is that Christianity, if you're going to practice it, has certain what's appropriate. And she has no idea. She hasn't even heard that maybe this is something Christians don't do and certainly don't talk about in a prayer breakfast setting. God bless you, Nancy. I really hope you sit down with a pastor and he explains to you how better to follow Jesus. But this ain't it. Hey, it's time. What are the rules?
Oh, what are the rules? What are the rules? What are the rules? What are the rules?
A couple of weeks ago, I was driving my car. I turned this corner, and there, on the grass of this street corner that I pulled onto, was this large dog. And he was dropping the puppies off at the pool. Like, he was relieving himself. It was a number 2. I'm trying to be delicate here, but there was nothing delicate about this situation because it was a large dog. And because of the size of the dog and the way the dog was squatting and the effort the dog was having to put into it, my thought was, this seems way too intimate to be happening on the street corner. Like, this should not be happening. I should not be seeing this. And, the owner is there, staring at the dog, watching the dog do this. He's used to it. He's waiting there to use a shovel to pick up whatever the dog is putting down. But I didn't want to see it. It was too much for me. And I'm just saying, if you've got a dog that is heavier than the average elementary school child, you should just go ahead and have that dog do its business behind a tree or something. Give us all a little bit of privacy for our own dignity, if not for the dog's. And, I was trying to figure out, okay, I've seen horses poop, I've seen elephants poop, and it's not that big of a deal. And it's the squatting. It's the squatting that the dogs do that make it look just a little too human. And it's fine if it's a little dog because, they're little. You don't see all the details about what's happening. The size of the poop doesn't offend you. But if it's a big dog, please, here's the rule. Give that hound some privacy. Remember, I want to know what's wrong with you.
What's wrong with you?
If you'd like to submit a question, topic, or tell me how I was wrong, you can email me at listen@thewrongpodcast.com or submit a comment at my website, thewrongpodcast.com. And help me spread the wrong message. If you like what you hear, share it with your friends. And really, people, I could really use some reviews on iTunes or Spotify or whatever your podcasting app is. Go in there and leave a review. Don't just hit the stars. Like, say something nice about me. That would be so great. I would love that. Something nice, though. Now it's time for my favorite part of the show. I was wrong.
I was wrong. I was wrong.
Listener Danny, who happens to be my father, said, concerning episode 90, men are disgusting. Watch the Seat could be one of the best bumper stickers ever. In gender-neutral bathrooms, bringing your own disinfectant should be a requirement. And thanks, Dad. And also in male-only bathrooms, right? Like, this isn't just gender-neutral. Like, this is for everybody who has to use a restroom with men. Here's the good news. Urine is actually sterile. It's hard for us to believe, but it's sterile. You won't catch a disease from it. But it is gross, right? Listener Alicia, concerning the same topic, she wrote in and said, "Okay, Tim, I love your podcast, and I even love that you admitted that men are disgusting. And so I wish I could say, men stop being disgusting, and that would change things. But I know men are also stubborn, so that won't work. Thanks for the heads up to always look closely at the seat and not assume it's clean. But here's the thing about the toilet seat. Please put it up while you pee, and then put it back down when you're done. Simple. Don't leave it down when you pee. Don't put it up and then leave it up. Not only do women really not like falling in the toilet, but we also really do not like having to touch the seat. Oh, and thirdly, we don't like having to clean up after or finish a job that a man should have done. Seems like a general courtesy. And if my 5-year-old can do it, a grown man can do it too." Alicia, you are not wrong that it's a courtesy that should be extended by all men. You are absolutely not wrong. I'm telling you, it is wrong for you to assume that men will be courteous. You were right. Men should be courteous. But really, really, for your own good, just don't assume it and don't make this your fight. You're just not, you're going to be in for a lot of disappointment if you think you can convince men to be courteous in a public restroom. I wish it were not so. Issue number 3, freedom. There are some stories that are too good to be false. And by that I mean that the story fits a narrative that everybody needs for some greater moral of the story. And the narrative is actually more important than the truth about that specific story. Let me give you 2 examples. One is the death of Matthew Shepard. Matthew Shepard was a young gay man in Wyoming who was murdered really brutally. He was beaten to death, tied up to a fence and beaten to death. Awful death. Whatever was going on with Matthew, he did not deserve to be murdered. And he for sure didn't deserve to be murdered that way. The narrative that went out was that Matthew was murdered because he was gay. And a reporter several years later followed up on the story, did a deep, deep dive on this story. And it turns out that Matthew Shepard died because of a failed drug deal. And one of the men who murdered him was his sometimes lover. Now, that story, the truth, the facts about that story kind of messed up the narrative that went out at the time. That homosexuals are at a great danger in the United States because of our culture, because of our cultural homophobia, because of the things that made people think that it's okay to abuse and bully homosexuals. And for sure, we should not be bullying and abusing homosexuals. Of course not. If he was beaten because he was gay, it would have been wrong. Unfortunately, that's not how the story went. That's not the facts of the story went. Another story along the same lines is the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando. Awful story. Nobody there deserved to die in the way they died. Nobody should be going into a nightclub and shooting up anybody, much less into a gay nightclub and shooting people up because they're gay. The shooter apparently didn't even know it was a gay nightclub. He was crazy, and he just needed to kill people, and he happened to choose a gay nightclub. The story is still awful. It doesn't fit many of the narratives that came out about the story. So hold that thought for just a second. There's something else I need to talk about, and that is grifters. Grifters are kind of along the same line. They've got a story that's too good to be false. They are promoting something that you believe in wholeheartedly. You believe in this thing, they're promoting it, and you're willing to give your money to them because they're promoting something you love. Televangelists are a great example of this. Unfortunately, there's a lot of examples of what comes to your mind about grifters and televangelists, right? People who probably don't actually believe in the story of Jesus, but they confess him to be real, and they say, hey, the best thing you can do for Jesus is give me your money. And then either because of their hypocrisy or because of their cynicism, they take your money and they live a life that does not reflect that of Jesus. And there's lots of kinds of grifters. There's political grifters. Like there's tons of emails going out saying, hey, the best way to, protect this liberty or this right or this political value is to give me money. And then, they spend barely any money, like maybe basically just the legal requirement, if even that, on whatever cause they're promoting. And then they're taking 90% of the money for themselves. Grifting is gross, right? We hate grifting. Except for the people being grifted. They're like, that's great. I'm so glad this is out there. I'm glad to give I finally have somebody to give my money to. And that may be even the worst part of grifting, is that the people who are being grifted don't mind. And they kind of get upset if you actually tell them that they're being conned, right? True story about all cons. The person exposing the con is the people getting victimized by the con are more angry at the person exposing it than the con artist. Even when they finally confess that, yes, I was being conned, they're typically more angry at the person who exposed it. So I bring this up. I bring up those two things because there's this movie out right now called Sound of Freedom. And this movie is doing great. It is a box office success. It's actually made more money than Indiana Jones, and it's made more money than the Mission Impossible movie. And that is significant. It might say something about the state of those two franchises, but it's also about the success of this movie. It has made way more movie than it cost to make. And based on my Facebook feed, plenty of people are going to see the movie right now. And this movie is about child sex trafficking. And to be sure, let me emphasize this. This is the most important thing I say in this podcast episode today. Child sex trafficking is real and it's evil. It is real and it is evil. There are awful, awful things being done to children to satisfy the sexual urges of very gross, very evil people. And because it's so gross, because it's so real, because it's so evil, it's an easy problem to hate. And sometimes we need obvious villains. And for sure, those involved in the child sex trafficking trade are villains. Absolutely villainous. We should hate them. We should hate what they're doing, and we should seek justice for those children in any way we can. Now, I haven't seen The Sound of Freedom. I'm not going to give a movie review on a movie I haven't seen. I I know other people are quite fond of giving reviews of things they haven't read or seen. I personally have an aversion to that kind of thing. I don't do that, even if I'm tempted to. I actually think Jim Caviezel is a good actor, and from what I hear, the production values of this movie are pretty high. And if you like the movie Taken, you might like this kind of movie. If this is your kind of movie and you enjoy it, great. I got no beef about the movie or about anybody seeing the movie or enjoying the movie. If this is your kind of movie, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Now, this movie is based on a true story. And we all know that movies based on true stories aren't the actual true story. We kind of get that, hey, there's this format that this story needs to fit. It's a 2-hour story. It has to have, certain things to meet the genre of storytelling. If you want to sit down and hear somebody tell the whole story, you might get a more accurate story. You might get a more truthful story. But in a movie, we kind of have to set things up like this. And, if you had a song based on a true story, there'd be other parameters around it that we'd have to change the story a little bit so that there'd be a rhyme scheme and so there'd be a chorus and things like that. And I've got no issue with somebody taking a story and making a movie based on a true story. Pearl Harbor actually happened. It didn't happen the way things happened in that movie, but it was a real thing. And we kind of all know that we don't need to say that Pearl Harbor wasn't real because the movie wasn't accurate in all aspects, right? And that is true of this movie, Sound of Freedom. Totally want to give the caveat that I know and you know, and I know you know, that the movie is not real life. That it is only based on a true story. How much it's based on a true story kind of matters to me in this particular respect. Because child sex trafficking is something I'm very concerned about. I've given my life to seeing vulnerable, victimized children be restored to families and be renewed and reconciled out of terrible, terrible things that happen to them, including child sex trafficking. And what I want you to know is that the movie, Sound of Freedom, has a character named Tim Ballard. And the character, Tim Ballard, is based on a real person named Tim Ballard, but they are different. The movie character and the person are different. Significantly different. And the stories they tell in that movie about Tim Ballard are also different. And you might be interested to know how different they are. But I don't really want to get into that. I want to get into who the actual Tim Ballard is and what his organization, Operation Underground Railroad, is actually like and what they do. It is my belief that Operation Underground Railroad is a grift, and that it's a grift that largely profits Tim Ballard. It is my belief that they are taking good money away from real solutions to an urgent problem, and they are pocketing that money or misusing that money in ways that are actually counterproductive or harmful to children who are trapped in child sex trafficking. I do not think anybody should be giving any money to Tim Ballard, to the real Tim Ballard, or to Operation Underground Railroad. I think they are actually counterproductive to the cause of freeing children from child sex trafficking. Now, I'm going to give you some reasons for why I believe this, and you can investigate them on your own. I hope you do. Don't take my word for it. Go look into it yourself. There's a number of local police agencies that will not take money from Operation Underground Railroad. They will not allow Operation Underground Railroad to say that they are working with them because they have a number of reservations themselves. In one instance, OUR said that they were working alongside a local police agency. It turned out what they were doing to work alongside this local police agency was they made a small donation to the retirement fund. They weren't helping the police agency fight child sex trafficking. In fact, the local police agency has their own resources for that sort of thing. They don't need a bunch of vigilantes to help them do their job. In fact, it hurts them when that happens. A reporter uncovered some evidence of a strategy meeting at Operation Underground Railroad where they were configuring, like, what's the hierarchy here, who's in charge, where does the money go? And the bottom line was that all the money and all the promotion, not all the money, but everything about the organization needed to actually point towards Tim Ballard's personal website. That he should be the focus of all the publicity and all the awareness they make. That everyone involved should be directing everybody else's attention towards Tim Ballard. And a strange thing happened just before Sound of Freedom was released. This movie was made 5 years ago. It took them a number of years to find a distributor. I think one of the reasons it took a long time for them to find a distributor was because of the shenanigans that Tim Ballard's involved in. A number of people say, oh, it's because Hollywood, they're actually in favor of pedophilia. They actually like it when people sexually abuse children. They're for it. And so they didn't want this movie to come out because they actually like it. And so they knew this movie would hurt their ulterior motives. And I don't know why the movie took so long to find a distributor, but it's my belief that Tim Ballard was saying and doing things that people were like, no, we don't want to promote this guy's story. We don't want to promote this thing as something that he's actually doing in a positive light. Again, I don't know. But just before the movie was finally launched, Operation Underground Railroad parted ways with Tim Ballard. They said, hey, we don't want you as part of this organization anymore. The board let him go. And that just seems so strange. At this moment where this movie was finally going to be released, this huge box office success was about to happen. They were about to have their moment in the cultural spotlight and could really capitalize on things. They went different directions. I don't know why. I have no evidence that something, dark or sinister was happening, but it just seems weird. So last year, Operation Underground Railroad took in $40 million. They spent $13 million. And it's fine for a charitable organization to have reserves. It makes good sense for them to have reserves. But I don't know that their reserves should be 3 times their expenses. So at the very least, you don't need to give money to them because they aren't going to run out of money for several years. Even if nobody else gave them any money, they've got enough to cover their expenses for 3 years. And they're not, as an organization, they're not as transparent as I think a charitable organization should be. So they're not transparent with their money, and they're not spending their money on the things they say that they're going to spend the money on. They're actually holding it back. Since the movie was made, both Tim Ballard and Jim Caviezel have gone out. They've gone out to publicly speak, and both of them have been parroting QAnon conspiracy theories, specifically one about how leftist elites drink the blood of children. Nobody is producing evidence. Nobody's going to the police with evidence of this sort of thing. They should, if they have it, but it's just a smear. Like, it's just a smear against Hillary Clinton and against the left in general, against Hollywood. If you have evidence, you need to come forward with this. This is a very serious thing. Law enforcement really needs to get involved in this. If you don't have evidence, then it's a smear. If you're just repeating something you heard somebody else say, it's gross. You need to stop it. It's actually hurting the general cause to talk about child sex trafficking, which is real and does happen, and then start filling people's minds with this cannibalism. And if you don't have evidence of the cannibalism, it makes people think that the child sex trafficking is probably not as important as it really is. So that alone should give you reservations about Tim Ballard, that he's expressing these kind of conspiracy theories. What Operation Underground Railroad, one of the things they're known for is they get rich donors and they take them on these raids. They say that, hey, we have these raids. We go to third world countries. We go to Thailand. We go to Mexico. We go to places where the police are not doing what they should do. And we find kids who are being victimized in the sex trade. And we rescue those kids and we bring them to a safe place. And there's a lot of donors who are like, yeah, I want to be part of that. I want to see how you do it. I want to go with you. So they take these donors. Let's say they go to Thailand and they're not working alongside local law enforcement. They just go to bars, they go to the red light districts, and they start asking pimps for the opportunity to have sex with children. And they're like, hey, I want somebody young. Can you get me somebody young? And the pimp is like, sure, go over here. I'll have somebody there for you. And sometimes when these men who are going on these raids, they get to where the pimp tells them to go, there's not a child there. There's a young woman, but she's not a child. And they come back to the pimp and they say, no, I want somebody younger. Get me somebody young. Get me a child. And unfortunately, the way capitalism works is when you create a market, when you have a demand, somebody tries to fill it. And these pimps are capitalistic, and somebody is asking them, is saying, hey, I've got money if you bring me a child. And whether they have a child or not, they're going to meet that demand, right? In many ways, Operation Underground Railroad might actually be causing child sex trafficking. They might be causing pimps to go out and find children from wherever they can, whether they're street kids or they're unmonitored and they get kidnapped by these pimps, so that the pimp can get money from these foreigners who have money. When Operation Underground Railroad rescues these kids, they take them to a local orphanage and they drop them off. And for whatever reason, maybe they just don't know they should be doing long-term follow-up. They don't follow up with these kids. They don't go back to the orphanage on a regular basis to say, hey, how's this kid? Is he growing? Does he have everything he needs? What are his behaviors like? Is he still here? They just drop the kid off at the orphanage and leave. And here is the tragic irony about taking kids out of sex trafficking and putting them in an orphanage. Orphanages are not safe places for kids. Orphanages are not safe places for kids. They are not a good place for kids. Sexual abuse is actually rampant at orphanages. Kids are routinely sexually abused in orphanages by other kids and by staff members. Think about it. If you're a pedophile and you know these kids aren't being well monitored, what a great place to go work, right? An orphanage. And there's just this awful, awful irony of rescuing kids from a place where they would be sexually abused and then rescuing them to a place where they're likely to be sexually abused, right? Like, it's just awful. In addition, orphanages do not offer kids an opportunity for emotional attachment. And everything we know about child development now shows that when kids don't learn emotional attachment as kids, it leads to heartache and heartbreak for those kids as adults. And it leads to heartache and heartbreak for everybody who encounters those kids as adults. It's just not a good place to raise kids. And yes, what I'm saying is true of the orphanage that your church supports. I don't care how much confidence you have in the leaders of the people who set up that orphanage. how many times you go and visit that orphanage, I'm telling you that orphanage is not a good place to raise kids. There are much better places and solutions for those kids than orphanages. And if you'd like more information about it, I'd recommend that you check out the Christian Alliance for Orphans. They've got a lot of resources about it. And there is something called the Faith to Action Initiative. They publish things that you can do, that your church can do, that your faith community can do to transform your orphanage into something where kids are better raised and they're more protected. Please, if you know of an orphanage, if your church gives money to an orphanage, please go check out the Faith to Action Initiative. Please do better for those orphans. And yes, it's going to take a lot of work. I know some of you are like, oh, I don't want to do that. That's going to take work. Please, kids are being hurt. Don't let them get hurt with your nickel. So the last thing I want to say about this is that the movie ends by telling the audience, hey, there's one thing you can do. Here's the best thing you can do to prevent child sex trafficking. The thing you can do is tell other people to go see this movie. And when I heard that, I wanted to put my fist through something. It made me furious. Like, seriously, this is the best they could do? This is the best thing they could tell people to do to prevent child sex trafficking was to get people to go see this movie? Like, aside from it being so self-serving of the movie producers, I totally get it. It's an awareness campaign. Awareness campaigns are good. We need them. Absolutely. But you can't just have, like, the purpose of an awareness campaign isn't to get people to give more money to an awareness campaign. Like, you need to direct people to actual action, to things they can actually do to fix the problem. And if it's all just awareness problems, it's kind of a grift. It's capitalizing on a real problem and not fixing it. So here's what I want to give you. I want to give you some real solutions that you can do right now, today, this week, that can actually help solve the child sex trade. The first is get involved with a local foster agency. The best thing you can do is get involved in the problem right where you are with the kids in your neighborhoods. I promise you, child sex trafficking is a big enough problem that your local foster agency probably has kids that they're serving who've been sex trafficked. Get involved with them. Give them money. Offer support. Offer practical support to foster parents. Give them a night off. Babysit for them. Bring them meals. Help them in whatever way they need help. Ask them how you can help. And not just once, I mean ongoing. Or become a foster parent. Very easy. Well, none of this is very easy, but it's very accessible to you. It's very easy. It's within your realm of possibility to do. You can make this happen. The second thing that I think you could do is look into the International Justice Mission. This is a Christian charity that is working quite effectively, in my opinion, at stopping child sex trafficking. And they do it the right way. They work alongside local police and law enforcement agencies. They aren't just weekend warriors who are showing up. They've got a number of people working locally to bring this problem to an end. And here's the last thing I want to say about this movie and Tim Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad. I noticed that when somebody brings up a critique of the movie or of Tim Ballard or of this charity, people will say, well, you must be a pedophile. The only people who could criticize this man or his work or this movie are enablers. And this is so gross. Like, this is something Scientologists do. You recognize that, right? This is something Scientologists do. The only people who could possibly have a problem with what this cult is doing are the most evil people in the entire world. Like, this is just thought-stopping, and it's so juvenile and so childish. Like, don't let those words come out of your mouth. Like, maybe my critiques aren't real. Maybe they're not valid. That doesn't mean that I'm a pedophile. Maybe I'm misinformed. And how would it go if I turned this critique around on you and I said, no, the only people who don't want to hear that Tim Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad are not doing good work, those are the pedophiles, because they actually like pedophilia and they don't want the problem to be solved. So if you're praising the movie or you're praising Tim Ballard, you're actually an abuser. Like, how would that go if I said that to you, right? It wouldn't go well, right? You wouldn't accept that critique. You shouldn't accept that critique if I was offering it. So don't use it. Like, just drop it. That's gross. But I could be wrong. If you think I am, let me know. And let me know why. I had fun and I hope you did too. Bye-bye.